Welcome to Into the Verse. This is Ari Levisohn, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Adina Blaustein.
Ari, I'm really excited.
Well, it is Parshat Vayigash. We are neck deep in the Joseph story. We're two parshiot in already to the Joseph story. We have another two to go. So I want to use this as an opportunity to talk about something that is going to be focused very heavily in our parsha, but it's really going to span the entire Joseph story. I want to talk about something that happened at the very end of the Joseph story. Now, you're probably thinking I'm talking about Parshat Vayigash, right, when Yosef dies.
Yeah.
Actually, not what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Because there's one more time, actually after Yosef's death, that he does come up in the Torah. You know what I'm talking about?
I just want to make sure I understand the question. You're saying that there's the last time that Joseph appears?
Yeah.
Okay. I think I got this. In Exodus, I think in Parshat Beshalach, am I in the right track?
Yeah.
Okay. When Moshe is preparing to lead Bnei Israel out of Egypt, very exciting climactic time, Moshe suddenly has to go on an errand, and that is to collect Joseph's bones to make good on the promise that had been unfulfilled for hundreds of years, which is to bury Joseph's bones in the land of Israel. So while everybody's busy, with their matzah and packing up, Moshe's on this errand.
Right, exactly. And there's a really interesting midrash from the Tanchuma on this.
Are you talking about the midrash of how Moshe got the Nile to kind of raise up the bones? Is that what you're talking about?
I am, right. It's like your
yeah.
question,
So
how
I
did
remember
Moshe get the bones from the Nile? How did he even know they were in the Nile?
I remember learning
Right.
this midrash when I was in day school. Okay, so what I remember is Moshe had this problem, right? Joseph's bones were at the bottom of the Nile. I don't know why. I don't remember that part. And
The midrash actually starts off, he has another problem, which he doesn't even know where they are, because the Torah doesn't actually tell us they're in the Nile. And that's the first half of the midrash is, how he finds out where the bones are. But yeah, then he finds out they're in the Nile, and he's like, how do I get them? I don't have a submarine.
To get to the bottom of the Nile. Okay.
Right.
So I think he writes down God's name.
So it's not God's name. He actually writes out something else. He takes a bundle of something. He doesn't actually tell us what.
Okay.
And he writes on it the words "Alei Shor," which literally seems to mean rise up, O ox.
Yeah, which is kind of the symbolic name for Joseph. And I think in the blessings that Jacob gives him, he refers to Joseph as a shore. Okay.
Right. And then not just he refers to him as shore, but this is actually a quote from the blessing that Jacob gives Joseph. Part of it says, Alei Shor. And now, the Midrash says that Moshe wrote those words on this piece of whatever, threw it into the Nile, and what happens?
And the bones rise up.
So it's a fascinating Midrash, but it's actually not the end of the story. There's another Midrash on Parshat Kitisa that actually picks up the thread of this story and takes it one more chapter forward.
So just to contextualize, because I love playing this guessing game, Kitisa's talking about the Egel Hazav, right?
You and all of our listeners.
Right?
Talking about the Egel Hazav, right?
Okay, wait. So where in the Egel Hazav would this come up? Okay, so my wild guess, because something that I wonder if I'm connecting a thread, but I don't know if this is crazy, something to do with how they made the Egel Hazav. Is that at all where you're going with this? Okay, because I think I get why I mixed up how Moshe got the bones to rise up, because there's another midrash about how they even made the Egel Hazav, something with writing God's name or something about throwing something into a fire, and like somehow the Egel kind of emerged from that, I guess, I don't know, magic.
Adina, you're right on. Right, the backstory is that after the golden calf happens, Moses confronts Aaron, who seems to be responsible for forming the calf, and says like, "Hey, Aaron, what's up? Why'd you do this? What happened?" And Aaron actually says, "Well, I didn't really create it. I took all of this gold jewelry, I threw it into the fire, and out came this golden calf. It was just magical." And so the Midrash here is filling in, well, how did that actually happen, right? Like, and, why did a calf come out of the fire if Aaron just threw a bunch of stuff in? Why did it not come out just like a lump of gold?
Yeah, it's a pretty good
And so
question.
the Midrash says, along with all of this gold jewelry that was thrown in, it says, Natal haluach shekatav alav Moshe alei shor. The very board that Moses used to summon the bones of Joseph from the Nile, that got thrown in with all of the gold jewelry into the fire, and out came the golden calf.
Wow. So, two reactions. Firstly, it's probably a good idea not to just learn Midrashim by reading the little Midrash says. It's probably a good idea to, just like with Torah, study it inside and look at the text, because I feel like this Midrash is just part of my memories of growing up, and I never really studied it inside, and what a fascinating connection. And then number two, I mean, I'm just struck by, why are these two episodes connected? Like, why would the rabbis in kind of articulating these ideas want to stress this direct connection between these two episodes? They just seem completely different.
Right. That's the real question we have to ask when we read a midrash like this, is like, what are the rabbis getting at? What are they suggesting? And to me, it sounds like they're suggesting that the golden calf was somehow meant to resemble Joseph, right? Like this slit,
Yeah.
which basically says, "Hey, come Joseph, come out," was thrown into the fire, and out comes the golden calf. And it's as if the rabbis were saying, the golden calf, when you look at the golden calf, what you're really supposed to see is Joseph.
Like
But
Joseph
I don't know about you,
resurrected,
Adina.
like Joseph's bones coming to life.
Right. No, I don't know about
it's
you.
very
When
creepy.
I look at a golden statue of a cow, I don't really think, oh, hey, that's Joseph.
Yeah, it's funny.
So I want to give a metaphor that might explain how Chazal saw this. And that metaphor is actually Taco Bell. Now, I keep kosher. I've never eaten Taco Bell. But what I've heard is that everything at Taco Bell tastes the same. They have like dozens and dozens of items on their menu, and yet it all tastes the same. And the reason is because essentially they're just different arrangements of the exact same ingredients. They're just like, there's only so many ways you can arrange like, cheese and beef and some vegetables. And it's basically all the same thing. So like, a Crunchwrap Supreme might look different than a Doritos Locos Taco. But when you break it down, right, they're really just like tortilla and beef and cheese and some veggies.
I mean,
Yes,
it
I had
sounds
to look
delicious. But I could see how Taco Bell's marketing team might then have a challenge of, how do you entice customers that the menu is varied and delicious?
Right. And the way they do that is they put it in different packaging, and it looks totally different, and it looks like they have this big menu. So where I'm going with this is that maybe Chazal were really the astute customer who realized that these are just two different packaging of the same ingredients. If we break down the golden calf to its ingredients, we realize that it really is a manifestation of Joseph. So let's just think for a minute, like, what are the essential ingredients of the golden calf? So I'd say probably the easiest one is, well, it's a calf. And then, it's not just any calf, it's a golden calf. And then what do the people do to it? They bow down to it, right? So, okay, calf, golden, people bow down to it. Another important attribute is it's man-made. And then finally, probably like the most significant, is that they conceived of this golden calf as a replacement for God. They say, Ela Elokecha Yisrael asher halucha me'eretz Mitzrayim. Right? This is your God Israel who brought you out of Egypt. So it's a calf, it's golden, they bow down to it, it's man-made, and it's conceived as a replacement for God. To me, those are 5 really essential ingredients to the golden calf.
Okay.
So let's look at Joseph now and see if we can find those ingredients in Joseph too.
Okay.
Hey, this is Ari, host of Into the Verse. The podcast will be right back. But first, let me tell you about all of the amazing content you can access with the subscription to aleph-beta.org. Whether you're looking for inspiring insights on each parsha, a full-length course on the upcoming holiday that'll change how you celebrate, or a deep dive series into some of the most perplexing sections of the Torah, we have you covered. And we do it all through beautifully animated videos that make complex textual analysis a breeze to understand and bring the Torah to life. Visit aleph-beta.org and find out for yourself why thousands of people come back every week to pore over our 600 plus hours of content. And as a special gift for Into the Verse listeners, we'll give you the first month free when you sign up for an annual subscription. Just use the coupon code ITVFree. Now back to this week's episode. Okay, so let's start with the first one, a calf. And you already said this, you mentioned this before, right?
That's right. In Yaakov's blessings, he turns to Joseph and says, Alei shor. So perhaps the calf can be linked with the shore, an ox. A calf is basically a young ox.
It's just a young ox. So the Joseph calf ox connection, I think, is pretty clear. But it also has to be gold. So was there ever a time when Joseph was all decked out in gold?
Sure. I mean, his whole royal identity probably meant that he was wearing fine garments, gold all the time. And I don't know about you, but the image, and perhaps there's a textual proof of this as well, but whenever he encounters the brothers in Egypt, it almost seems like he's purposefully bedecked in royal finery. Like he almost makes a show out of emphasizing his special status. So I definitely would associate gold and kind of a special appearance with Joseph.
We don't even have to imagine what Joseph looked like wearing this gold, because the Torah actually does tell us when Pharaoh kind of anointed him as second in command, he put on Joseph a revid zahav, which is a gold chain. And this is like one of those details, like, I don't know about you, I never noticed, right? It's just like, okay, yeah, he put like royal garment. If you would ask me what did he dress Joseph up in, I would have been like, I don't know, like royal stuff.
Yeah, I would have just said
Egyptian
fancy stuff. Yeah.
Right. Because it's like one of those like subtle details that seems to be kind of irrelevant. But now we see, oh, wait a minute. Joseph was wearing this golden chain, and presumably he always wore this golden chain. This was part of his uniform in his position as second in command in Egypt, was this golden chain. And here he is walking around all day dressed in gold.
Okay, cool. So far we have 2 ingredients. What's the next one?
So it's not enough just for him to be golden and a calf, right? It also matters how the Israelites relate to him, right? And in the golden calf, one of the most critical things is that the Israelites bow down to it.
I mean, that
over time.
Yeah.
I don't even have to finish my sentence, right?
I know. And it's already, the image of Joseph is the dreams and how he imagines everyone bowing down to him. And then that, in fact, happens in reality, that they do end up bowing down to him.
Right. And they actually, the brothers, the original Israelites, the children of Israel, bow down to him not once, not twice, but actually 3 separate times. The Torah records them bowing down to him. Yeah. So this imagery of the brothers, the children of Israel, bowing down to this golden calf figure, it's really starting to add up. Another key ingredient, the calf was man-made, right? And if you think about, right, who made the calf? It was Aaron. So now who decked Joseph out in gold and put him in this position where everyone would bow down to him, right? Like, who made Joseph into an idol?
Oh, I see your point. In a sense, Joseph wasn't born into royalty. Pharaoh kind of made him royal. He appointed him into this position of power. So I guess, in a sense, you could say that Joseph, too, was man-made.
Right. And listen to this verse in Genesis 41:45.
Okay.
And this is the verse where it says that Pharaoh put him into this position. Kara Paro Shem Yotzef Tzafnat Paneach. So Paro gives him a name, a totally new name. He says, I'm going to call you Tzafnat Paneach. And then Vitein lo Osnat bat Potifera. And he gives him Osnat, the daughter of Potifera, Kohen On, the priest of On, Leisha, as a wife. So he gives him a new name and a new wife. And then, Vayitse Yosef al Eretz Mitzrayim. Joseph went out on the land of Egypt. It almost sounds like, okay, Joseph already existed. Pharaoh didn't make Joseph. But the Egyptian royalty, the second in command, the one that everyone's bowing down to, the one that's decked out in gold, well, his name's not Joseph. His name is Tafnat Paneach.
He has like an alter ego that
right?
Pharaoh just kind of willed into existence.
Pharaoh created this alter ego with a new name and a new wife, and then this language of Vayetze Yosef, Joseph like went out. It almost sounds like, it's like this new character emerged and was born and went out in front of Egypt. And that language of Vayetze, listen to what Aaron says when he describes making the golden calf. He says, "Vashichayu be'esh," right? I threw all of this into the fire. Vayetze ha'egel hazad. This calf, it just emerged. Right, Joseph here, it's just emerging. Both Pharaoh and Aaron, they're creating this thing, and then that thing emerges. And look how cool this is. This was Exodus 32:24, and this is when Aaron tells Moses that basically this is how I created the golden calf. And immediately after that, look how Moses responds. Vayar Moshe et ha'am ki faruahu. So Moses saw that the people were out of control. This word farua. Ki firao aharon shimtza b'kamehan. That Aaron let them get out of control so that they became a menace to anyone who opposed them. But look at that word. Ki pirao aharon.
I'm gobsmacked.
Hey, resh, ayin, hey.
Yeah.
What does it spell?
It spells paro, and it's just incredible wordplay here because it's such a bizarre and weird verb to use in this context, but it does seem like it's almost the Torah's way of, underlining with a thick yellow highlighter. There's a paro here in this story. There's a connection back to Paro's presence that you should be noticing.
Right, exactly. And it's almost as if Moses saw what Aaron did and said, ki paro Aharon, right? Like, Aaron, he's Paro.
Yeah, you're acting like Paro in this moment.
Right.
Maybe.
Right. You created an idol. It's wordplay, but it's fascinating. Mm-hmm. Okay, there was one more ingredient that I think is really like the most essential ingredient in all with the golden calf, which is that it takes the place of God. They say, Eila Elokecha Yisrael, Asher halucha me'eretz Mitzrayim, right? This is your God Israel who took you out of Egypt. So, is there any time where we see Joseph taking the place of God?
So, when you were listing the ingredients and we got to that one, my heart almost kind of thudded because the end of Genesis, when Joseph and the brothers meet up and they're overcome and they're really just thinking about the past few decades, and I think they're just in this state of just utter shock and not really sure how to move forward. And one of the ways I think that Joseph tries to calm them down is by saying, "Hatachet Elokim," like Anochi.
Yeah. So let's look at the verses, right? So in Genesis, we'll start in Genesis 45, verse 5. This is right after Joseph reveals himself to the brothers. And as you said, they're in a state of shock. And he says, Al te'atzvu v'al yichar b'nechem. Right? Like, don't be distressed, don't reproach yourselves. Ki mechartem oti hena, because you have sold me here. Ki l'mechya shlachani Elokim lefnechem. Right? Because God has actually sent me ahead in order to provide food for you and so that you can come down here and I could take care of you. In other words...
Yeah. So you can kind of read this as like Joseph saying, it was all for the best. It's all okay. This was God's master plan, kind of assuaging the brothers of their guilt.
Right. And then a few verses later in verse 8, he says, V'ata lo atem shlachtam oti hena. Right? You did not send me here. Ki ha'elokim. Right? God's the one who sent me here. But you mentioned something else, because Joseph tries to make this point to the brothers. He tries to explain to them, this is all part of God's plan. Like, it wasn't your fault. Like, it wasn't like God is the master puppeteer pulling all the strings. But this message seems not to fully get through to them.
Yes.
Because way later, at the very end of Genesis, after Jacob
After,
dies.
that's right, they come back to Joseph, and I think they're so worried that now that dad has passed on, now the revenge is going to happen. And they almost seem beside themselves. And they either lie or they're sharing with Joseph a conversation that he wasn't party to, which is basically telling Joseph, oh, before dad died, he wanted us to resolve things. He wanted us to forgive each other, to forgive and forget and move on. And it's that in that context, I think that Joseph says that line that I was alluding to earlier, Hatachat Elokim Anochi.
Yeah, exactly. So let's look at Genesis chapter 50, verse 17.
Okay.
Right? They give this message in the name of their late father Jacob, and they say, Ana sana et pesha achacha v'chatatam. Please now forgive the sins of your brother and their iniquity. It almost, that these language like sana pesha chatatam. It almost sounds like they're doing like slichot. Right? It's like they're like on
Yeah.
Yom Kippur, like, please, oh great master, forgive us.
Yeah.
And they go even further. And vilchu gam achiv, vayaplu lefanav, vayamru hinenu lecha lavadim. They come before Joseph. They throw themselves before him and said, "We're going to be servants to you. Just don't kill us. Like, let us be servants to you."
I would take it a step further and say, we're your slaves, not
Yeah,
just servants.
not even servants, right? Slaves. Like we're, you're a master. We're your slaves. Like, and Joseph is like taken aback by this. In verse 19, as you said, right, Joseph responds, Ki atachat Elokim anochi, like, am I in place of God? By itself, this might not seem like such a big deal. But when you read it, first of all, in the context of everything that Joseph's already said to the brothers of, you didn't send me here, God did this, this is all part of God's master plan. And then you add in the golden calf, and which I think is what Chazal are trying to draw our attention to. You realize, like, wait a minute, this is a big deal, right? Like, treating someone like they're God, like, that's what the golden calf was. That was terrible. I think all of this is really just leading us to ask, how could the brothers have done such a terrible thing in treating Joseph like a god, or like replacing God with Joseph, basically treating him like a golden calf? And, what makes this question even more surprising and even greater is, think about where this story started. Think about their relationship with Joseph way back in Parshat Vayigash when we started reading this story.
They wanted to kill him. This is an incredibly extreme difference.
It's like a 180 flip. Right? Neither of them are good. They're both pretty bad. You don't want to kill him. You don't want to treat him like God. But like, how did it go from one to another? And I know the steps that I know A led to B led to C, and we know the story and how the progression went. But when you stop looking at the trees and you zoom out and look at the whole forest, that's a really remarkable 180 flip.
Yeah. We know so much about the plot twists, but what's going on emotionally, psychologically is
Right.
a mystery.
Right. So if Joseph really it was an earlier version of the golden calf, right, then maybe we can look at the golden calf and try to understand that story, and maybe understanding the story of the golden calf will help us understand the story of Joseph.
That's great. Like all good intertextual studies,
Right.
Both stories can help us understand each in a clearer way.
So truth is, I think we can ask a really similar question about the golden calf. In fact, I would say it's probably the question that anyone has to ask when reading the story of the golden calf, which is, how could they do such a thing, especially after experiencing the Exodus? They went so far as to say in Exodus chapter 32, verse 4, Ela Elokecha Yisrael, this is your God, Israel, Asher halucha me'eretz Mitzrayim, who took you out of the land of Egypt. How could they say such a thing? How could they just replace God so easily? And how could they think that this man-made idol was their God? It sounds absurd.
Yeah, it really does.
So to me, Rav Hirsch has really a great answer to this, which is that the actual sin wasn't making the golden calf.
Okay.
The actual sin was back in chapter 32, verse 1, when they said, Ki ze Moshe ha'ish, this man Moses, asher halucha me'eretz Mitzrayim, who took us out of Egypt. Lo yadanu mahayala, we don't know where he is. This man Moses, who took us out of Egypt. Right? This here was the real root of their sin. They never fully appreciated God's role in bringing them out of Egypt. And they attributed that to Moses. Right? And so then naturally, right, now that Moses is gone, they need to replace him. And, better to replace Moses with, someone who's not going to wander off on you and, disappear on top of a mountain. So a statue is a good replacement. But they weren't replacing God. They were replacing Moses. The real sin of the golden calf was that they never appreciated God's role in taking them out of Egypt. So how does this explain our question in the Joseph story about how the brothers acted? Right? Remember, Chazal are suggesting that Joseph was the original golden calf. Then there should be a parallel here. So, Adina, if the problem of the golden calf was the Israelites failing to see God's hand in bringing them out of Egypt, what may have been the problem in the Joseph story?
Yeah, I think the problem that emerges is their failure to see God's hand in bringing them to Egypt. And
Right,
their, I think,
exactly.
resistance to seeing that grand master plan and to join Joseph in having this panoramic view of the steps leading up to this.
Exactly, right? And as we read before, right, Joseph tries to tell them, Lo atem shlachtamoti hena, ki Elokim, right? You were not the ones who sent me here. You thought you were, but we were
Right.
all just puppets and part of God's plan.
Right.
And of course, the brothers, they never really appreciate that. Till the very end, they have trouble appreciating that. In last year's Vayishev episode, Daniel and I actually talked about how this really seems to be the whole journey of Joseph's life is actually about realizing that God is the master puppeteer, orchestrating all these crazy events of his life. And I think in the beginning he really doesn't. And I think one thing you see at the end is that really he does learn this, and he becomes the champion of this message. And I think that's really one of Joseph's crowning achievements, at least in terms of his personal growth, is learning to really see the hand of God in his life. And there is no real end of the story here, right? It doesn't say that the brothers responded, "Oh, Joseph, see, you're right." And I would at least hope that maybe some of this message of Joseph got through to the next generation and maybe made that 210 years in Egypt a little bit more bearable.
I think certainly Moshe's actions in bringing his bones out of Egypt is almost meant to be a reminder to the nation as they're trekking through the wilderness at every step of the way. Hey, God's hand, God's hand. I'm almost imagining, through that journey through the wilderness, there's this casket that they see, very visibly kind of
Wow.
on their caravan. And they're almost meant to look at it and realize that man who saw God's hand in everything, we need to take him back to the land. We need to restore him back to the land. It's almost like a symbol of he stood for, I see God's hand in my life. We need to realize that we see God's hand in our lives as well.
Adina, I'm like literally getting chills as you're saying that. It's so powerful. That's totally right. Like they were carrying this casket of Joseph with them as they left Egypt, right? And it was important for them to take his casket with them as a reminder of this lesson that Joseph stood for. Like this was his last message. His last thing he says to them is like, remember, this is part of God's plan. He is bringing you here.
Yeah. And I just realized something else, which is it's Joseph himself who has the foresight to insist that his bones are taken out, right? He makes them swear that when you leave, and I know you will, take my bones out with you.
Adina, there was something I wasn't planning on bringing up here, but now that we're talking about this, I have to. We're talking about Joseph's final message to the Jewish people, to the Israelites, that, this message of God is the one behind all of this. God's the one who brought you here. That God's the one who's going to take you out. And there's one phrase which really becomes It almost becomes like Joseph's like catchphrase, and the last phrase that he's like remembered for, which is "Pakod yifkod etchem." Right? God will surely redeem
Yes.
you. Pakod yifkod.
Yes.
He says that multiple times, and not just does he say "Pakod yifkod etchem," but he says "Valitem etchem min haaretz hazot," and God is gonna take you up from this land, al eretz shenishba la'Avraham litzchak Yaakov, to the land which he promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That word pakod, a double word pakod, actually comes up in the golden calf episode. At the end of the story, God says, he's actually talking about how he's going to punish people, and it's a totally different meaning. And he
Yeah.
says, "B'yom pakti ufakadati aleihem et chatatam," which means like on the day of my
Like my reckoning.
remembering, I will remember the sins. But like the literal meaning aside, that here we have that double language of pakod again, and that's recalling that final message of Joseph. And the very next chapter starts off, God tells Moses, "Alei mizeh," right? Get up from here. "Ata
Yes.
ba'am asher halita me'eretz Mitzrayim el haaretz asher nishba la'Avraham u'litzchak Yaakov." That same exact
Yes.
phrase, together with this double language of pakod, which is recalling Joseph's message at the end of his life. And that message for that generation, and I think really for all future generations, is God is behind it all. God's the one who brought you here. God's the one who's going to take you out. Anytime in your life that you feel lost, or you feel alone, or you feel like, it just doesn't make any sense, right? Like, God's behind it all.